When the auction flyer fluttered out of the stack of mail, she almost didn't notice it. It was thin, printed on rough yellow paper, the kind of thing most people would throw away without a second thought. But something about the bold black letters caught her eye. County property auction starting at $500. For a long moment, she just stared at it. $500. It didn't even sound real. Houses, even broken ones, didn't cost that little. It had to be a misprint, a scam, or maybe one of those strange internet deals that turned out to be nothing but disappointment. Still, curiosity tugged at her. Her name was Lena, and at 32, life had not been kind to her lately. A few years earlier, she'd been working steadily at a small printing shop in the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid her bills. Then the company downsized and her position disappeared. What followed was a string of odd jobs: waitressing, cleaning, bookkeeping, none of which lasted long enough to bring stability. The bills piled up. Her savings vanished. When her apartment lease ended, she packed everything she owned into 2 old suitcases in the backseat of her aging car. She told herself she'd figure something out. But weeks passed and nothing did. The auction notice felt like a tiny spark of light in all that uncertainty. The flyer said the county was selling off abandoned and tax-foreclosed properties, some starting as low as $500. Most of the homes were in rough shape, and buyers had to agree to fix them up within 2 years. That night, she sat in her car at a small roadside diner, sipping a cup of coffee and scrolling through her phone to look up the listings. She didn't have high hopes, but then one photo stopped her. It was a small, weathered wooden house on a quiet street, surrounded by wild grass and a few crooked trees. The porch sagged, the paint peeled, and one window was boarded up. But even through the decay, there was something peaceful about it. The caption read simply, "2-bedroom cottage built 1946, starting bid $500. She whispered the number out loud, half disbelieving. $500. She had just enough in her bank account to cover that, and maybe a bit left over for food. Logic told her it was ridiculous. Who buys a house for less than the cost of a used sofa? But another voice inside her said, "What if this is your chance?" The next morning, she drove 2 hours to the county office where the auction was being held. The room was small and plain, with maybe a dozen people sitting on folding chairs. Most were older men wearing work boots talking about land and taxes. She felt out of place, clutching her bag tightly in her lap. When the auctioneer called out the lot number for the little cottage, nobody raised a hand at first. The room was quiet. Then, before she could overthink it, Lena lifted her hand. $500, first bid, the auctioneer said, glancing around. Any other offers? The silence stretched. No one else spoke. Going once, going twice. Sold. Just like that, the hammer came down. In less than 30 seconds, she had bought a house. A real one. Her hands trembled a little as she signed the papers. The clerk smiled politely, probably assuming she had no idea what she was getting herself into. Later that day, she drove out to see her new home in person. The sun was dipping low when she pulled up in front of it, and for a long while she just sat in her car, staring. The place looked even smaller than in the photo, leaning slightly to one side as if tired from standing so many years. The front steps creaked when she tested them, and the door stuck halfway before it opened with a groan. Inside, dust hung in the air like mist. The floors were scuffed and uneven. Old wallpaper peeled off in strips, revealing wood underneath. The kitchen sink was rusted, and the faucet dripped into a cracked basin. A faint smell of old wood and damp earth lingered. But despite the mess, she smiled. There was something strangely comforting about it. The house wasn't pretending to be anything it wasn't. It was broken, yes, but honestly broken, waiting for someone to care enough to fix it. She set down her bag and walked slowly through each room. The living room had a wide window that looked out over the overgrown yard. The bedroom floors were warped, but the ceilings were high, and in one corner stood an old rocking chair, left behind by whoever lived there before. In the kitchen, she found a newspaper from 1978 tucked behind a loose tile, and a jar of nails sitting on a shelf. Everything told a story of time and neglect. Yet she could almost imagine what it might look like after some love and work. A warm light glowing through clean windows, a table with coffee cups and fresh flowers, laughter echoing against the walls. That first night she slept on a blanket in the middle of the empty living room floor. The wind whistled through the gaps in the walls, and every sound, the creak of wood, the groan of pipes, made her flinch. But as she lay there, staring up at the cracked ceiling, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A strange, fragile kind of hope. The following days were filled with hard work. She started by sweeping, scrubbing, and patching the roof where rain leaked in. She found a local man willing to help her with the wiring in exchange for a home-cooked meal. Slowly, little by little, the house began to change. Still, it wasn't easy. Her hands blistered from pulling weeds and her arms ached from scraping paint. She ran out of money faster than she expected. Some nights she ate canned soup by candlelight because the electricity hadn't been turned back on yet. But even then she refused to give up. One afternoon, while pulling up a section of torn carpet in the back bedroom, she noticed something strange. The boards beneath it were uneven, not nailed down the same way as the rest. They looked newer somehow, as if someone had replaced them years later. She ran her fingers along the edges and frowned. Why would someone replace just one small section of the floor? She made a note to come back to it later. For now, she had too many other repairs to worry about. Weeks passed. Bit by bit, the house started to feel like hers. She painted the living room walls a soft cream color, repaired the front steps, and even planted a few flowers outside the porch. Neighbors occasionally slowed down to watch her work. One elderly woman from across the street came by with lemonade and said kindly, "That house has been empty for years. It's good to see someone bringing life back to it." Lena smiled, touched by the gesture. "Do you know anything about who lived here before?" she asked. The woman shook her head. "Not much. There was a family once, years ago. They left suddenly, I think. People around here don't talk about it much." Lena didn't press. Every old house had its history, she thought. Maybe it was better not to dig too deep. But late at night, when the house settled and the wind whispered through the cracks, she sometimes wondered who had walked those same floors before her. She'd catch herself imagining voices, laughter, footsteps. It was eerie, but not in a frightening way. More like the house was trying to remember its past. One evening, she sat on the floor near the fireplace, eating a simple dinner and staring at the flames. That was when she heard a faint thud beneath her foot. She shifted her weight and it happened again, a hollow sound, like there was empty space under the boards. At first, she thought she imagined it, but curiosity got the better of her. She tapped along the floor, following the sound, until she found a small patch that echoed differently. It was the same area she'd noticed weeks earlier. She crouched down, ran her fingers along the cracks and gently pressed. One of the boards moved slightly, just enough to make her heart race. For a moment, she considered stopping. Maybe it was just a loose plank. Maybe she didn't want to know what was underneath. But something deep inside told her that the house had been holding on to a secret for a very long time. She leaned closer, the flicker of the fire casting soft light across the floorboards. The air felt heavier, stiller. Then she whispered softly to herself as if afraid to disturb the silence, "What are you hiding down there?" And though she didn't yet know it, that simple question would soon change everything. The mornings in that small town were quiet. Sometimes the only sound was the wind moving through the tall grass that surrounded the house. The smell of wet earth lingered after every night's dew, and in that calm silence, the house almost felt alive again. Lena would wake up before sunrise most days. Her routine was simple. A cup of instant coffee, a quick stretch, and then she'd step outside with her toolbox. She wore the same faded jeans and an old flannel shirt covered in paint stains. Her hands were rough now, the skin dry from cleaning and sanding. But every blister, every scratch felt like a sign that she was finally doing something that mattered. When she had first moved in, her goal had been survival. Now, it was transformation. She wasn't just fixing walls and floors. She was trying to build a new life. The work was slow. The house had been neglected for so many years that every repair led to another problem. One morning, she discovered that one of the pipes under the sink had rusted through completely, flooding the kitchen floor. The next week, part of the ceiling in the hallway caved in after a heavy rainstorm, but she kept going. When she couldn't afford to buy new materials, she visited a local salvage yard where old doors, wood panels, and discarded tiles were sold for cheap. She learned how to patch holes, fix leaks, and replace broken window frames by watching online tutorials on her phone. She didn't always get it right the first time, but she refused to quit. Some evenings, she would sit on the front steps with a notebook, writing down what she had done that day and what she needed to do next. Her handwriting was messy, but the pages filled up quickly. Paint hallway walls, one list said. Replace living room board. Check loose floor in back bedroom. That last line stayed there for weeks, circled twice, but she kept skipping it. She told herself it wasn't important, just a small uneven spot that could wait until everything else was done. But deep down, she knew she was avoiding it because it made her uneasy. Every time she walked into that room, she could almost feel something beneath her feet, something heavy and silent waiting to be found. It wasn't fear, exactly, more like curiosity mixed with hesitation. She didn't want to believe there was something strange in her home. It was easier to think of it as an old floor that needed repair, nothing more. One afternoon, while she was sanding down the doorframes, an elderly man from the neighborhood stopped by. He introduced himself as Mr. Carver. His hair was white and thin, and he carried a walking stick that clicked softly against the porch steps. "You've been working hard out here," he said with a warm smile. "This place looks better than it has in decades." "Thank you," Lena replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Still a long way to go, though." He nodded, looking past her at the house. "I remember when this home wasn't empty. Used to belong to a family named Whitaker. Nice folks, kept to themselves mostly. Do you know what happened to them?" she asked, curious. The man frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing in thought. "Not exactly. One day they were here, the next they were gone. Some say they moved away after the husband passed. Others said they left things behind in a hurry. Never really knew the truth." Lena listened quietly. There was a heaviness in his tone, like the story had more to it, but he didn't want to say. Before he left, Mr. Carver looked back at her and said, "Be careful with old houses like this. Sometimes they hold on to memories longer than people do." That night, his words echoed in her head. Houses hold on to memories. She lay awake, listening to the old boards creak and the wind hum through the gaps. For the first time, the house didn't feel lonely. It felt watchful, like it was waiting for her to notice something. Days turned into weeks. She painted the living room a soft shade of ivory, built shelves out of reclaimed wood, and hung a small curtain in the kitchen window. The more she worked, the more the house began to feel alive again. Birds nested under the eaves, and sunlight streamed through the clean glass panes. But every time she walked through the back bedroom, she still felt that strange pull toward the uneven section of floor. It was subtle, but she couldn't ignore it anymore. One morning, after finishing a long list of chores, she decided to finally deal with it. She got down on her knees, tapping along the boards with the handle of a screwdriver. Most of the floor sounded solid, but then came that hollow thump she'd heard weeks earlier. It was faint but distinct. She leaned closer and pressed down on the plank. It moved slightly under her hand. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed her hammer and gently pried up one corner. Dust puffed into the air. Beneath the first board was another layer of wood, older and darker. She carefully pulled up another plank, then another, until she uncovered a small rectangular section, almost like a hidden compartment. For a moment, she just stared at it. Her breath felt heavy in her chest. Why would anyone build something like this under the floor? She hesitated, unsure if she should keep going. But curiosity won. Slowly, she lifted the final piece of wood. Underneath was a small metal box. It was rusted, its surface dull with age and wrapped with a piece of wire twisted tightly around it. Lena froze. Her mind raced. It could be anything, tools, keepsakes, or even something dangerous. Her first instinct was to leave it alone. But then again, this was her home now, and whatever was inside had been waiting there for a very long time. She grabbed a pair of gloves and carefully unwound the wire. It was stiff and brittle, snapping in a few places. The lid creaked as she opened it. Inside were small bundles wrapped in cloth. She picked one up and unwrapped it slowly. Inside were several old coins, silver ones, tarnished but clearly valuable. Beneath that were two small rings, a locket, and what looked like a stack of folded papers tied with string. Her hands trembled as she opened one of the papers. It was a letter, written in faded ink, the words almost unreadable, but she could make out a few lines. If anyone finds this, we had no choice. The house must keep it safe. She stopped reading, her heart racing. The air felt thick, like the room had suddenly closed in around her. She sat back, staring at the box and its contents. Her mind flooded with questions. Who hid this? Why? And what were they trying to keep safe? As she turned over one of the coins, she noticed the date, 1943. Everything inside the box was decades old. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She didn't tell anyone about what she found. Not yet. It felt too strange, too personal. That night, she placed the box on the kitchen table and sat beside it, staring for hours. The house was silent, but it felt like something had shifted. She thought about the Whitaker family Mr. Carver mentioned. Had this box belonged to them? The letter sounded desperate, almost like a warning. When she finally went to bed, she couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump. At one point, she thought she heard soft tapping somewhere in the walls, though it might have been the wind. The next morning, she decided to clean the items carefully. The coins were beautiful beneath the tarnish, some marked with foreign symbols. The jewelry was delicate, likely handmade. The locket contained a tiny black and white photo of a couple standing in front of the same house she now lived in. They looked happy, but there was something haunting in their eyes, like they were guarding a secret. Lena wrapped everything back up and placed it carefully on a shelf. She wasn't sure what to do next. Part of her wanted to turn it into the authorities, but another part of her felt protective of it, as though she had been meant to find it. That afternoon, she took a walk through town to clear her mind. The air was crisp and the streets were quiet. She stopped by the library to look up the Whitaker family and old records. The librarian, a kind woman with silver glasses, helped her search through the archives. They found an old newspaper clipping from 1951. The headline read, "Local family vanishes. No trace found." The article said that the Whitakers had lived in a small wooden house on Pine Hollow Road, the same address as hers. One evening, neighbors reported seeing lights flicker in the windows, and by the next morning the family was gone. No one ever found out where they went. As Lena stared at the article, chills ran down her spine. It felt surreal, reading about the very people who had once lived in her home, and possibly hidden that metal box beneath her floor. She folded the paper carefully and thanked the librarian before leaving. On her way back, the sky had darkened with thick gray clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance. When she got home, she paused on the porch and looked at the house. The wind moved through the trees, and for a split second, she thought she saw a flicker of light behind the window upstairs. She blinked. It was gone. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe the house was finally beginning to share its story. She stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind her. The rain began to fall, steady and soft. Somewhere in the kitchen, the metal box sat waiting on the table, holding secrets that had been buried for over half a century. And deep down, Lena knew this was only the beginning. The storm that night was heavier than usual. Rain pounded against the windows, and the old roof groaned under the weight of it. Lena sat at the kitchen table, staring at the small metal box in front of her. The coins, jewelry, and papers were still spread out neatly on an old towel. Every time the lightning flashed, the silver coins glimmered like they were alive. She traced her finger over one of the letters again. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded to brown. It looked like it had been written in a hurry. She tried to read more of it under the soft glow of her lamp. "If anyone finds this, we did what we had to do. Forgive us if the truth never came to light." The words sent a chill through her. There was no name at the bottom, no date, just a smudged mark that might have once been an initial. For hours she sat there, her thoughts spinning. She thought about the family in the photograph, about how their smiles looked genuine, yet their eyes seemed worried. Something had happened in this house, something that drove them to hide their valuables beneath the floorboards and vanish without a trace. By morning, the rain had stopped. The ground outside was soaked and mist clung to the trees. Lena stepped outside and took a deep breath of the cool, damp air. She had a decision to make. She couldn't just leave the mystery unsolved anymore. She needed to know what happened to the Whitakers. Later that day, she returned to the county records office. The clerk recognized her from the auction weeks earlier, and smiled as she approached. "Back again? How's the house treating you?" "It's interesting," she replied with a faint smile. "I was wondering if you have any old property records or documents about the previous owners of my place." The clerk typed something into her computer, frowning thoughtfully. "Let's see. That address belonged to the Whitaker family until 1951. After that, it was listed as unoccupied. Then it changed hands a few times before it was abandoned for good." Lena leaned closer. "Do you know what happened to them? Why they left?" The woman shook her head. "No official records of a move or sale. They just disappeared from our files. You might try the town library archives. Sometimes local papers keep stories like that." That was exactly what she did. At the library, she spent the afternoon hunched over stacks of yellowed newspapers and brittle records. The librarian, a kind woman with soft gray hair, helped her search through boxes of old clippings. And then, buried deep in one folder, Lena found what she'd been looking for, a short article from 1951. The headline was simple but haunting. "Local family vanishes, no trace found." Her heart pounded as she read. The article explained that the Whitaker family, husband, wife, and their young daughter, had been reported missing after neighbors hadn't seen them for several days. Their car was still parked in the driveway. Their belongings were left untouched inside the home. Police had found no signs of a struggle, and no one ever came forward with information. The investigation eventually went cold. There was even a small black and white photo of the family, the same photo she had found inside the locket. She sat there for a long time, just staring at it. The smiling couple, the little girl holding a doll, they all looked so normal. It didn't make sense. What could have happened to them? The librarian came over quietly and said, "You know, there used to be rumors about that house. People said the man, Mr. Whitaker, was keeping something valuable hidden. Some folks thought it was money. Others said it was something else, documents maybe. But after they disappeared, no one ever found anything." Lena's mind raced. Maybe the metal box was what they had hidden. Maybe that was what everyone had been searching for all those years. But if that was true, then why did they vanish without taking it? That night she drove home with the newspaper folded carefully on the passenger seat. The sky was clear now, filled with stars. When she reached her house, it stood quietly at the edge of the road, the porch light glowing softly in the dark. Inside, she placed the article beside the metal box and looked around the kitchen. The house seemed different now, more alive, as if aware that its secret was finally being uncovered. She decided to go back into the back bedroom where she had found the box. The loose floorboards were still piled neatly to the side. She ran her hand along the empty space beneath and noticed something she hadn't before, a small indentation at the far end. She shined her flashlight inside and saw the edge of another piece of metal. Her heartbeat quickened. Could there be more? She grabbed a hammer and gently pried at the spot. The wood gave way with a groan. Dust filled the air. Beneath it was a second, smaller compartment, so hidden it would have been impossible to see without removing the first one. Inside was an old envelope, sealed shut and tied with a thin piece of twine. The paper was yellowed, brittle to the touch. On the front, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "To whoever finds this, please understand." Lena sat back on her heels, staring at it. She hesitated for several minutes, her fingers trembling as she untied the twine. The seal broke easily, and inside were several handwritten pages. The writing was faint, but still readable. The letter began with, "My name is Ruth Whitaker. If you are reading this, then you have found what we could not take with us." Lena's breath caught. The letter went on to describe how the family had fallen on hard times after the war. Mr. Whitaker had invested in a local company that went bankrupt, leaving them in debt. In desperation, he had taken to hiding whatever valuables they had left inside the house, hoping to protect them from being taken by the bank. But then the tone of the letter changed. "My husband discovered something he was never meant to find. I cannot say what it was, only that it brought people to our door, men we did not know, asking questions, demanding things that were not theirs. We feared for our safety. We planned to leave quietly in the night, but I am writing this in case we cannot." Lena's hand shook as she turned the page. "If you find this home, please treat it kindly. Everything we had we left here. The money, the jewelry, those are not the real treasures. The truth is buried deeper still, but perhaps it is better that it stays where it is." Some things bring more harm when uncovered. The final line read, "May this house bring peace to whoever gives it life again." Lena lowered the letter slowly. Her chest felt tight. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a family's final message, written in fear and hope all at once. For a long time she sat in silence, listening to the faint creaks and whispers of the old wood around her. The air in the room felt heavier now, filled with stories of the past. She carefully placed the letter back into the envelope and set it beside the metal box. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about what the letter meant. What had Mr. Whitaker found? Who were the men who came to their door? And why had the truth been hidden all these years? She talked to a few locals, but none of them knew anything more. Most just shook their heads, saying the Whitaker story was one of those small-town mysteries that people stopped talking about after a while. Still, she felt connected to the family somehow. Their words, their belongings, they had survived decades underground, waiting for someone to find them. And now it was her. One evening, she decided to organize everything she'd found. She cleaned the coins and jewelry, placed the letters in protective sleeves, and stored the documents carefully in a box of her own. It wasn't about the value anymore. It was about preserving their story. While sorting through the old papers, she found one last folded note she hadn't noticed before. It was a small receipt from a bank dated 1949, with the name Whitaker printed neatly at the bottom. In the corner, there was a handwritten number that looked like part of a deposit box code. Her curiosity grew again. Maybe there was still something left out there, something the Whitakers never managed to retrieve. She stared at the receipt under the warm light of her lamp. The thought of uncovering one more piece of their mystery filled her with both excitement and dread. The letter's warning echoed in her mind. Some things bring more harm when uncovered. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying everything in her head, the discovery, the letters, the photo, the storm. She thought about Ruth Whitaker writing that letter, unsure if her family would survive the night. And as she lay there listening to the old house breathe and shift in the dark, she realized something profound. The Whitakers hadn't just left behind treasure. They had left behind a story of fear, love, and hope. And now it was her responsibility to decide how much of it to bring into the light. The next morning, as the sun rose over the quiet town, Lena stood in the doorway of her small wooden home. The golden light spilled across the freshly painted porch, warming her face. She looked out at the trees swaying gently in the breeze and whispered softly, "I'll take care of it, all of it." Inside, the hidden compartments were now empty, but the air still felt rich with the weight of history. Somewhere deep within its old beams and creaking floors, the house seemed to sigh in relief, as if it, too, had been waiting for someone to finally listen. The morning after Lena had found the last of the Whitaker family's clues, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was holding its breath, waiting. She stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunlight stretch across the yard, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. She glanced over at the small metal box, still sitting on the table, and the envelope with the handwritten receipt she had found. There was something more. She could feel it. Whatever the Whitakers had hidden all those years ago, there was still a piece of the puzzle missing. They had left behind clues, but it was as if they had deliberately stopped short, hoping someone would come after them. The letter had warned her. Some things, it said, could cause harm if they were uncovered, but Lena couldn't help herself. The mystery was too much to ignore. That afternoon, she decided to go back to the bank mentioned on the receipt. It wasn't far from her house, just a short drive down the winding road that led into the town center. The building was small but well kept, with large windows and a red brick exterior. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and paper. A few customers stood in line, while others sat at desks speaking with bank employees. Lena hesitated for a moment, her fingers curling around the crumpled receipt in her pocket. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to find, but something told her it was important. She approached the counter where a woman with glasses was organizing some paperwork. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice warm. Lena pulled the receipt from her pocket and laid it on the counter. "I was hoping to find out if this deposit box number is still in your records." "I know it's from a long time ago, but it's important." The woman examined the number carefully and nodded. "It's unusual for a deposit box from that long ago to still be active, but I can check for you." Lena waited, watching the woman type on her computer. The seconds stretched into minutes, but finally the clerk looked up. "I'm sorry," she said, looking a little surprised. "The box you're asking about was last accessed in 1951. The person who had it never made any withdrawals or deposits after that." She paused and glanced over at Lena. "In fact, it's been closed for over 70 years now." Lena's heart skipped a beat. Closed. The box had been left untouched, abandoned just like the Whitakers. She leaned forward slightly. "Could I see the records for when it was closed?" The woman seemed hesitant. "That's a bit tricky. You'd have to prove you have a legitimate reason to access those details. You're not related to the Whitakers, are you?" Lena shook her head. "No, but I've been living in their old house. I found something they left behind. I believe there's a connection between the box and the things I found in the house." The woman looked thoughtful, as if weighing the situation. After a moment, she stood up and walked to the back. Lena's fingers drummed lightly on the counter. She wasn't sure if she was doing the right thing, but the feeling in her chest, something that had been gnawing at her for days, told her to keep pushing. When the clerk returned, she was holding a thick folder. She placed it carefully in front of Lena. "Here's what I could find. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. The records show that Mr. Whitaker, the account holder, had made some unusual deposits in that box. Unfortunately, there's no description of what was inside. But I did find a note that says contents not for immediate retrieval." Lena frowned. "What does that mean?" The woman shrugged. "I have no idea. It's not something I've ever seen before in a deposit box file." Lena thanked her and walked out of the bank, the folder clutched in her hands. Her mind was racing. What was in that box? What was so important that the Whitakers had hidden it for all those years? And why had they never returned to claim it? As she drove back home, she couldn't stop thinking about the contents not for immediate retrieval note. It felt like a message, a warning. Back at her house, she sat at the kitchen table with the folder spread out in front of her. She looked at the papers again, trying to make sense of them. There wasn't much there, just a few receipts and notes and an entry that listed the box's closure date. But there was one more document that caught her attention. A faded letter from the bank's manager to Mr. Whitaker, dated a few days before the family disappeared. Lena's eyes narrowed as she read the letter. "Dear Mr. Whitaker, we regret to inform you that due to certain circumstances, your account and the contents of the safety deposit box you requested may be subject to further review. We urge you to contact our office at your earliest convenience to resolve this matter." The letter was brief, but it was clear that something had happened. Something had made the Whitakers nervous. And it wasn't just the financial problems they were facing. It was as if they had been pushed into a corner. Lena sat back in her chair, the letter in her hands. She felt a strange sense of dread wash over her. What could have been so important, so dangerous that the Whitakers had risked everything to hide it? And why hadn't they ever come back to claim it? She put the papers down and stood up, pacing across the room. The house felt heavy with the weight of its history. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the cracks in the walls seemed to whisper secrets. That night she went to bed early, hoping sleep would clear her mind. But as she lay there in the dark, she kept thinking about the letter, about the warning in the bank records. Something in her gut told her the Whitakers hadn't just disappeared. They had been forced to. Something had happened to them. The next morning she decided to visit the local historical society. Maybe, just maybe, they would have more information about the Whitakers, something that would connect the dots. The historical society was housed in an old building near the center of town. It was quiet inside, with rows of dusty shelves filled with old books and photographs. A friendly woman in her 60s greeted her as she walked in. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, adjusting her glasses. Lena hesitated, then nodded. "I'm looking for information about a family that used to live on Pine Hollow Road, the Whitakers. I've been doing some research into their history and found some things that don't quite add up. I was hoping you might have something on them." The woman's expression changed slightly, as if something had shifted in the air. She seemed to study Lena for a moment before speaking. "Most of what we know about the Whitakers is in the town's archives. They were a quiet family, not much to note. But there's one thing that stands out. A few months before they disappeared, there were rumors, whispers, really, that Mr. Whitaker had been asking around about an old property, a piece of land no one had thought about in years." Lena felt a jolt of excitement. "Do you know what land he was asking about?" The woman nodded slowly. It was a piece of land near the river back behind your house. It hasn't been used for decades, maybe even 100 years. Some say it was abandoned after an old mill closed down, but it's still there, covered by trees and brush. No one's really paid attention to it since the mill was shut down. Lena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The land behind her house? The same place where she had found the box? Is there any way to find out more about it? She asked urgently. The woman gave her a small smile. There might be something. You can try the town's land records office. They've got maps from back then. But I warn you, the area's difficult to get to. It's overgrown and forgotten. Most people just leave it alone. Lena felt a surge of determination. If that was where the answers lay, she was going to find them. After thanking the woman, Lena headed toward the land records office. The day was turning colder, and the sky had begun to cloud over. As she drove toward the office, she thought about the Whitakers, about their quiet lives and sudden disappearance. What had they found? And why had they left behind everything except that one secret? The answer was just ahead, waiting for her in the forgotten corners of town. Lena's mind raced as she drove to the land records office. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the road. The cold wind that swept through the cracks of the old car made her shiver, but it wasn't the chill that kept her on edge. It was the feeling that she was getting closer to something important. The town's land records office was a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It looked like one of those places you'd drive by without giving it a second thought, but today it felt like the key to unlocking the last part of the Whitaker mystery. She parked the car and walked inside, the door creaking behind her. The room was filled with old filing cabinets and dusty maps. A middle-aged woman sat behind the counter, typing away on a computer. Lena cleared her throat. Hi, I'm looking for some old land records. I've heard there's a piece of land near my house, behind Pine Hollow Road, that's been abandoned for a long time. Do you have anything on it? The woman looked up, a slight frown appearing on her face as if she'd heard this request before. Behind Pine Hollow? That old mill site? Well, it's not exactly something people ask about much. Most folks just leave it alone. Lena nodded. That's what I've been told. But I believe the Whitaker family might have been looking into it before they disappeared. Do you have any maps from around 1950? The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the connection. I might. You're right. It's not something that comes up often. Hang on a minute. Lena watched as the woman shuffled through the records, pulling out a few thick folders. She placed them on the counter with a soft thud, then slid them over to Lena. Here you go. These are the maps from the 1940s and 50s. If you find anything interesting, let me know. Lena nodded, already flipping through the first map. Her eye scanned the faded ink, following the lines of roads and landmarks. When she reached the back of the map, near the river, she found the mill site. The area around it was marked with the word abandoned, but as she traced the path along the river, she saw something else, a small, nearly hidden area marked with the name Whitaker. Her heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just any land. It was directly tied to the Whitaker family. She didn't waste a moment. Is there any way to find more about this specific area? The plot marked Whitaker? The woman looked at the map, narrowing her eyes. That's strange. I've never seen that before. It wasn't on any official records. She paused, then added, but I do remember something. A few years ago, a developer came in and tried to buy up the land around there. They said there was something valuable under the ground, something buried. But they never finished their plans. Too many people thought it was just rumors. I never thought much about it, but now that you mention it... Lena's pulse quickened. Something buried. The phrase echoed in her mind as she gathered the maps and hurried back to her car. She had to find this land. Whatever was hidden there, it was the final piece of the puzzle. The drive back to Pine Hollow was faster than before. The sun was now setting, casting a purple glow over the trees. As she turned onto her street, Lena felt a strange sense of urgency. She couldn't explain it, but it was as if the house itself was pulling her in. Once she was home, she grabbed a flashlight and headed for the overgrown path that led to the back of the property. The trees loomed high above her, their branches stretching like bony fingers. She had walked this path before, but tonight it felt different, more foreboding. The ground was soft underfoot, the thick moss giving way as she stepped forward. The air was dense with the smell of wet leaves and earth. As she pushed through the underbrush, she thought she heard something, a distant sound that made her stop in her tracks. Was it the wind? Or something else? She listened carefully, but the sound was gone. Shaking off the unease, she pressed on. It wasn't long before she reached the spot the map had indicated, an area of land near the river, thick with trees and overgrown vines. She could see the outline of an old stone wall hidden beneath the foliage, barely visible but unmistakable. Lena knelt down and began to pull away the vines, her flashlight illuminating patches of moss-covered stone. The more she cleared, the more the wall became visible, an old weathered structure that seemed to belong to a different time. It was at that moment she realized this wasn't just a wall. It was a foundation, a building that had been here long ago. Her heart pounded as she reached into the dirt, pulling away debris to reveal what looked like a door frame, half buried in the earth. This had to be it, the place where the Whitakers had hidden whatever they had found all those years ago. Lena stood up, hands trembling, as she ran her fingers over the outline of the door. It was old, its wood rotting, but still solid enough to reveal something important. With one sharp motion, she pulled at the frame. The door creaked open and a cloud of dust rushed out into the air. Lena coughed and wiped her eyes, but when she peered inside, she saw something that made her freeze. A wooden chest, ancient, covered in layers of dirt and dust, sat inside, nearly untouched by time. It was small, but its significance was clear. The chest had been buried here, hidden away for decades. Lena knelt down, her breath caught in her throat, and gently pried the chest open. The hinges squeaked and the lid lifted with a groan. Inside were stacks of papers, yellowed with age, and several small leather-bound books. There were no jewels or coins, no gold, but the contents were far more valuable than anything she had imagined. Lena carefully picked up one of the books, brushing off the dust. The leather was cracked, the edges worn. She opened it to the first page. It was a journal, a personal account of the Whitaker family's life. The writing was shaky, as if the author had been in a hurry. It described the events leading up to the family's disappearance, their growing fears, and the discovery that had set everything into motion. "We found something," the journal began. "Something we were never meant to find. It wasn't gold or treasure. It was something hidden for a reason. And now because of it, we are in danger." Lena's hands shook as she read. The journal went on to explain that Mr. Whitaker had stumbled upon an old, forgotten document hidden deep within the town's archives. An ancient deed that showed the land on which the mill had been built. The document revealed that the land was once owned by a powerful family, one that had disappeared mysteriously many years earlier. It wasn't just a deed. It was a record of a secret, one that had been buried to protect those who came after. The journal described how the Whitakers had been warned by someone who knew too much. They had been threatened, told to leave or face dire consequences. But they had refused to give up the secret, and so they had hidden it, burying the chest beneath the old mill foundation, hoping to keep it safe. As Lena read the final words of the journal, she realized the truth. The Whitakers hadn't just disappeared. They had been forced to leave because they knew too much. They had uncovered a secret that could shake the town to its core. And now, all these years later, it was up to her to decide what to do with it. The chest, the books, the papers, it was all too much to take in. But Lena understood one thing clearly. The mystery wasn't just about finding treasure. It was about protecting the truth. The Whitakers had left this hidden story behind, trusting someone would find it. And now that someone was her. With the journal in her hands, Lena stood in the dark, surrounded by the ruins of the past. The chest was no longer just a relic, it was a key to something much bigger. The Whitakers had wanted to protect their discovery, and now it was up to her to honor that trust. She made a silent promise to herself. Whatever she decided to do with this information, she would carry their story with her. The truth they had hidden would never be forgotten, and with that she closed the chest, carefully covering it back up with earth and vines. The secret was safe for now, but one day the world would know the truth. As she stood up and walked back toward her house, the wind whispered through the trees, and the past seemed to sigh, as if finally at peace.